So, good afternoon to one and all. This is Kuchuru Maishra Reddy, representing the IEEE Shreya student branch, and we would like to thank the IEEE Hyderabad section and the IEEE Computer Society section of Hyderabad for giving us the opportunity uh, to present this webinar on cloud computing fundamentals. And I would like to thank Rajnikant sir for giving us time to do this. And Rajnikant sir, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So, good evening, everyone. I thank IEEE Computer Society student branch, Shreyas College of Engineering, for giving me an opportunity uh, to deliver a session on cloud computing fundamentals. So, before beginning with, I will try to put this session very fundamental so that the beginners will get a very good understanding of what cloud computing is. So, moving on, what exactly cloud computing at the nutshell is. So when we speak with a lot of people on what exactly cloud computing is, people always say it is something storing on internet. Cloud computing is some storage space. But I say cloud computing is nothing but placing the computing on internet. In simple words, I say computing on internet. So what does this mean? So when we speak about computing, we speak about executing our programs, which says we require a deployment environment, which says we require an underlying computer infrastructure, which also says we also require a storage space to store our program and data. So finally, as I said, cloud computing is an internet computing on internet. We are able to get all these services from the cloud computing. So when you look at the slide, we can find it. Cloud computing is the delivery of computing services, which includes servers, storage, databases, networking, analytics, intelligence, security, and whatnot. So we could get any of the computing need through the cloud computing. So because of this cloud computing, we are able to get the resources whatever we want, and we are able to do whatever the innovation we want. As well, we are able to achieve the economies of scale. Economies of the scale means the amount of resources which we want, we are able to get in fraction of time. By using this cloud computing, so the question comes, how do we procure it and what exactly costs for us? So the cloud computing is an utility computing model where we are not going to purchase the resources which we want, but we are going to subscribe those resources. When I say a subscription model, we are going to pay for the resources only when we actually use. So this actually is going to give an economy of the scale. So this reduces the operational cost for an organization or an individual who is using the cloud computing. We are able to scale our businesses as per the need with the help of cloud computing. Say for example, an organization is not using cloud computing. Their business has scaled up enormously in a short span. So when the business has expanded, they actually required the computing infrastructure. So procuring the computing infrastructure and placing the infrastructure in place for an organization takes a lot of time. But when an organization starts using cloud computing, as and when they require more computing resources, they can procure them immediately. So moving on, the characteristics of the cloud computing. So we could see 5 major characteristics of the cloud computing. The first one speaks about on-demand self-service. What does this on-demand self-service says? It says when an organization or individual is using cloud computing, and when, as I mentioned, I require more resources, say computing, more resources, say storage, more resources, say network, and individual intervention is not required. The cloud computing itself is going to perform its own self-service provisioning and is going to provide the required resources. So with just raising a request, just with a button click, we are able to get the resources whatever we want. And we call this as on-demand self-service provisioning. An internal or an intermediate intervention is not actually required. Then speaking on the second characteristics, which speaks about broad network access. So when I say cloud computing, which is scalable, and when it is scalable, the cloud computing infrastructure is not present at a single place, but widely distributed across the world. Accessing those resources require a very good network access, and cloud computing will provide the required broad network access. We can have our own virtual private network. We can access through a public network. We can access through a leased lines, but we can access to the resources provided by the cloud computing. This is one of the important and interesting characteristics of the cloud computing. Then the third important characteristics is the resource pooling. As said, the cloud computing is highly scalable. And when I say highly scalable, this means enormous number of enormous resources are actually available, widely distributed across the globe, and are actually pooled together and provided to a subscriber on demand. So we call this as resource pooling. And when I say cloud computing highly scalable, the cloud computing infra is not actually developed by using a supercomputer, but actually is developed by using the commodity hardware.
Computer Society chapter ni
What is this commodity hardware?
Good evening to all the participants and good
commodity hardware is nothing but the low cost hardware which we use like our laptops, desktops, etc. And all these low cost computing resources are joined together to perform the complex computing for the users or for the subscribers. Moving on to the fourth important characteristic is the rapid elasticity. So here we are using the term elasticity than scalability. What does this elasticity means? Scalability says we can expand as and how we require. We can increase, we can get the resources that what we want, but the next minute when we are not using those resources will be released from the user. So as and when we want, we can expand. As and when we do not want, we can release those resources, so that we actually pay only for the resources that which we are using. So this is actually going to help the subscribers in reducing their operational costs. Moving on to the fifth important characteristics, we call it as a measured service. As already I mentioned, cloud computing is nothing but computing as a service over an internet.
ఏమో సార్ నేను ఆఫ్
But
చేసే పెడుతున్నాను.
whatever the
మీటింగ్
service
రాగానే
that
కట్
which
చేసిన
we
పని
get
మ్యూట్
is
ఆన్ ఏంటి
measured.
దాని తర్వాత
It is measured because we pay as
Sir?
per what actually we use. And these are the 5 important characteristics of a cloud computing technology or the cloud computing environment that which we use. So the people may ask, why we need to migrate on cloud? How these characteristics are actually going to help me or my business?
మేబీ ప్రిన్సిపల్ సార్
One
కూడా అలానే
simple factor is, by migrating onto the cloud,
ఓకే సార్
an organization can actually concentrate on their actual business instead of taking the headache of procuring the IT infrastructure. So elaborating this sentence,
ఓకే ఫైన్ సార్
if an organization is is developing its own IT infrastructure,
మన క్లాస్
they have to spend a lot of time, manpower in procuring that IT infrastructure, but migrating onto the cloud will be taken care by the cloud service provider, and the organization can actually concentrate on their core business, what exactly they are meant for. So this advantage has made many of the organizations to migrate onto the cloud. But there are also the issues, there are also concerns for organizations and users when they start of migrating to the cloud. The very first concern that comes is the ownership. For an organization, an important asset is their data, and the data lies within their IT infra. When an organization migrated onto the cloud, so their applications, their data, their process will reside in the cloud computing infra. Means the data process of an organization are lying at a third party place, which gives an illusion to the subscriber or the user that they lose the ownership of their data. Their data is in the hands of the third party. So this is one of the major concern. So moving on.
Sir.
The challenges. As just I mentioned, there are many more challenges. The first one is about the security and privacy. Coming to the security and the privacy, as mentioned, the organizations were concerned about the security and the privacy of the data. The cloud computing is a shared environment. Cloud computing supports multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy means more than one organization are going to share the common resources. So when an organization data is stored on the shared pool of resources, the security and privacy of their data and processes is a concern. There are good number of security policies have come, but still this is a challenge for the cloud service provider to convince the subscriber.
Okay, sir.
The another important challenge is interoperability. Here interoperability means when an organization want to migrate onto the cloud. Here the point is, an organization may migrate their complete applications and data onto the cloud, or they might migrate the part of the data, part of the processes onto the cloud. And sometimes an organization might procure the cloud services, few from one provider and a few from other provider. Then the issue of interoperability comes. A service provider may not sync his applications, his services with the services of other provider, or a service provider may not sync his services with our own services. So this is one of the major challenge. Moving on to the third one, which speaks about portability. Say now, we migrated our processes and data and applications onto the cloud, and at latter, we want to move back to our own IT infra, or we want to move our own IT infra onto the cloud. There comes some of the issues in migrating the applications from our own infra to the cloud or from one cloud to the other cloud. Then moving on, the another important challenge is the computing performance. The performance of the cloud may not remain same all the time based on the availability of the resources. As I mentioned, the cloud supports multi-tenancy. The underlying cloud infra will be shared by many subscribers. Based on the subscriber workload, the computing performance varies. Moving on to the last challenge, which is reliability and availability. As mentioned, an organization has migrated onto a cloud. So migrating onto the cloud, all our applications, data, and processes will be there with the cloud service provider. And the cloud computing is a distributed computing model which completely relies on the network. And say if the network fails, say if we do not have an connectivity, then we fail to run our applications, we fail to get our data. So this is one of the major concern which we call it as availability. So when we migrate onto the cloud, we always expect our data and the processes to be available all the time with us. And for that, we need to have a reliability. So whomever the cloud service provider we have chosen, we should rely on the service provider that the services, the processes, and the data are available all the time. And we say cloud computing is a ubiquitous computing model, which is an anywhere, anytime computing model. So we can connect to our processes, we can connect to our data by using any of the computing terminal connected with an internet. We are able to do our processes. So these are the challenges there with the cloud computing, and today many of the service providers have overcome. So now we are speaking about cloud collaboration, which says some of the services from one provider, some of the services from the other provider, and we can run our applications. Moving on, the major advantages of the cloud computing. So the first major advantage is flexibility. As just I spoke, we connect to our computing, migrated onto the cloud through internet using any of the device. A device may be a thin client, it might be a thick client, it might be a laptop, it might be a mobile, it might be a desktop, irrespective of the geolocation. So we might be there in US, you might be there in Europe, you might be there in India. Anywhere in the world, we can connect to our systems, we can connect to our data, and we can perform our business processes. So we call this as flexibility. Moving on to the second benefit, the disaster recovery. As said, whenever we are using computing for our business processes, The computing might fail,
లాక్ మీటింగ్ అని ఉంది,
and we require a recovery mechanism.
చేయలేదు.
And there is a very sophisticated disaster recovery mechanism available with the cloud. Just to elaborate on
ఎండ్
this,
మీటింగ్ పక్కన 3 dots
whatever the data
అది టాప్ చేస్తే లాక్ మీటింగ్ అనే ఆప్షన్ ఉంది.
stored on the cloud maintains at least 3 copies of the same data.
అదే సార్.
We call this as data replication.
Fine.
And the cloud maintains the replication factor minimum 3. Say, if any system which holds our data goes wrong, then we can recover our data which is present on a different node or a different terminal. So this way we have a very sophisticated disaster recovery mechanism available with cloud. Moving on to the third benefit, which speaks about automatic software updates. As we know, when you are working with our machines, our operating systems gets updated, our application softwares gets updated. We require to update the licenses, we require to update the new versions. All these updations will be done by the cloud computing on its own by using its characteristic self-service provisioning. So we are not required to worry about the licensing. We are not required to look into the dates of license expiries. And moving on, the next important benefit is pay as you go. As already I mentioned, we pay only for the services which we use, which is going to reduce our operational cost. Moving on to the next benefit, which is an increased collaboration. So because of migrating onto the cloud, we can subscribe to huge number of services which is going to benefit our organization. Say our applications are migrated onto the cloud. Say the cloud service provider is offering a service, say analytics. We can subscribe to it and analytics will be available to us immediately. And as our processes are available on the cloud, say our business is integrating with other business, so the application integrity happens within fraction of time. And moving on to the another benefit, the document control. So whatever the processes, the business, the data that is migrated onto the cloud, the audit of the data, the audit of the processes will be securely maintained by the cloud computing service provider. Moving on to the next benefit is the security. The cloud environment has a very enhanced security mechanisms. These days we are also able to see security as a service. The applications and the data stored or migrated onto the cloud will be provided with a very enhanced security. And whenever a user, a subscriber migrates onto the cloud, the subscriber will get a service level agreement. In the service level agreement, the service provider will ensure the security, will ensure that the data and the processes will not be used by the third party. And the last and foremost important benefit of cloud computing is location independent. So location is not at all a constraint. And now when we migrate onto the cloud, we can't say where exactly our data resides, where exactly our process resides. Even the cloud service provider fails to say the location of the data. all the distributed data centers of the
ఏం చేయాలి
cloud
సార్?
service provider available across the globe can be used by the subscriber for storing his data
ఏం లేదు సార్,
irrespective of the geolocation.
అన్మ్యూట్ ఉంది,
So
చాట్
these are
ఉంది,
the
మ్యూట్
major
లాబీ ఉంది,
cloud
ఎక్స్ఎల్
computing benefits which we get when we migrate onto the cloud.
ఎక్స్ఎల్ అంటే పోతాడు.
Moving on,
మళ్ళీ రమ్మన్నాను సార్, అయిపోతుంది. ఓకే సార్, పోయింది సార్. అయితే నో ప్రాబ్లం కదా.
the common terminologies that we use with the cloud computing. The one is cloud service provider. I'm using this word frequently. Whom we call as a cloud service provider. An organization who provides the cloud infra, who provides the computing services through the cloud. We call them as cloud service provider. For example, Microsoft is one cloud service provider. Google is one cloud service provider. Amazon is one cloud service provider. Salesforce is one cloud service provider. Like that, we have a number of service providers who provide variety of services for us. The next important terminology which we speak about is the cloud data center. A data center is nothing but a place where the hardware infra, interconnected infra is available. And we call that particular place as a data center because it stores the data on the underlying commodity hardware which is interconnected. And then moving on to the third terminology, commodity hardware, already I mentioned, it is nothing but the low cost hardware interconnected so that we can perform high performance computing with that low cost hardware. And this is the commodity hardware which is used for building the cloud data centers. And moving on, utility computing. Cloud computing is called as an utility computing. In simple, we are not going to procure the IT infra, but we are going to subscribe to the IT infra provided by the cloud service provider, and we pay for what exactly we use. And the next terminology is ubiquitous computing. So ubiquitous computing says anywhere, anytime computing, irrespective of the geolocation, irrespective of the kind of device, irrespective of the time, we are able to connect to the systems, the processes, and the infra. So moving on, by this, we are able to understand what is exactly cloud computing. What are the characteristics of cloud computing? What are the challenges of cloud computing? What are the benefits of cloud computing? Now, how the cloud computing is used by the end users. So when we say this, from the cloud computing, we have three types of the deployment models and three major types of the services offered by the cloud through internet. Coming to the services, we come in. Sorry. Coming to the services, the foremost service is infrastructure as a service. Then the second kind of service is platform as a service. And the third type of the service is software as a service. These are the major service models provided by the cloud computing. But they were not stopped at that. In recent times, if we could see, we also have storage as a service. We also have desktop as a service. We also have hardware as a service. We also have AI as a service. But majorly, as a beginner to understand, three major services provided by the cloud computing are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And people call service stack. In the service stack, always at the bottom comes with infrastructure as a service, and on the top of infrastructure as a service is the platform as a service, and on the top of that we get software as a service. So I will be elaborating on this in the next coming slides. And then coming to the deployment models. So we have three different kinds of the deployment models. We call it as public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud. We also have one more model, we call it as community cloud. So what is exactly the difference between a deployment model and a service model? Service model says what kind of computing service you are going to take. Are you in need of hardware computing, processing power? Are you in need of a deployment model where you can develop your own software? Or are you in need of a software which is readily available to use? So these are the three different service models. Say infrastructure, which speaks about underlying hardware whenever you are in need of underlying processing power or storage power. Platform layer, say, if you want to develop some project,
Sure.
you require to have an operating system, you require to have an application software like MATLAB, you require to configure it, having a database behind, and then on the top of that you are going to develop your application, finally deploy your application. And on the top of that, sometimes we want a software which is readily available. Say for our mailing we use Gmail, for our social connect we use Facebook, for our professional connect we use LinkedIn. All these are nothing but software as a services. So based on the kind of computing service we require, we are going to subscribe to either IaaS or PaaS or SaaS. Sometimes an organization or a user may subscribe even to all the three, or
Sure.
two among the three, or one among the three. Now,
sir.
moving on to the deployment models. So now, to use these services, we have to migrate our processes. We have to migrate our data onto the cloud. And as already I mentioned, cloud computing supports multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy means when more than one user or more than one subscriber will share the common computing service, say common processing power, say common deployment environment, say common software like Gmail. All of us are going to use the common Gmail, having our own user account, but all our mails will be stored in the common database. We call this as a multi-tenancy. Now, the subscribers are very much concerned about the security and privacy of the data. They want to migrate onto the cloud, but they do not want to go with multi-tenancy. They want to use cloud computing services, but they do not want to share the hardware with other subscribers. There are some organizations who want to migrate onto the cloud. They were ready to get shared the computing resources. There are some organizations who want part of their data process can be shared and part of their data process cannot be shared. Looking at this varied needs of the subscribers, the cloud computing has come up with different kinds of deployment models. Say the first one, public cloud. Public cloud supports multi-tenancy. The name itself says various subscribers use the cloud computing and share the underlying cloud services. So in organizations where the security is the least concern, they always go for public cloud. Moving on to the next important one, that is private cloud. An organization who want cloud services but do not want the multi-tenancy. Do not want multi-tenancy means do not want to share the cloud services, cloud resources with other organization, then they go for private cloud. But as mentioned, cloud computing is a utility model. We pay for the use of the services, we pay for the use of the resources. The cost of the private cloud will be very high when compared to the public cloud.
Sir, mute option
But the security of the private cloud will be very high when compared to the security of the public cloud. So now, to reduce the operational cost of the cloud computing, the cloud
fine, sir. Okay.
Computing service providers have come with the third deployment model, and they called it as a hybrid cloud.
Yes, sir. Yes.
What does this hybrid cloud say?
Sure.
It is a combination of public cloud and private cloud. As said, an organization having their own processes and data, and all the processes and all the data may not require the same amount of security. So the least secured data and processes can be kept on public cloud, who share the resources with other organization, and the data and processes with high security will be stored onto the private cloud. So this is what we call it as a hybrid cloud. And now the hybrid cloud ensures the security of the private cloud as well, reduces the operational cost as incurred to the private cloud. So moving on, there is also a fourth deployment model, and people call it as a community cloud. As the name says, community cloud, an organizations of mutual interest, mutual trust will share the cloud services and the resources. And as the organizations are having mutual trust, the security is not going to be a concern there. A community cloud is same as public cloud, but the sharing organizations have a mutual trust. So the operational cost for the cloud for the organizations will be drastically down, and they actually enjoy the private cloud deployment model. So moving on, the cloud service model. Sorry, my heading says deployment models. It is service models. Now, what infrastructure as a service provides? In simple, it provides a simplistic view of IT infra. Say, say I require more processing power. Say I require more storage space. Say I require more number of instances. I require more number of virtual channels for broadcasting in a short latency. I can get all of them by using infrastructure as a service. So all those complex IT I can get just with a user interface and just by providing the required data. Then the platform as a service, what does it provide? It provides a very simplistic view of programming. So as I said, if you want to develop an application, we always go for platform as a service. And third one is simplistic view of resources services, software as a service. So as said, we are not worried about how Gmail is developed. We were not worried about the Gmail versioning. We were just worried about having a username and starts working it. Just get a credential and start using the service, and which we call it as software as a service. These three statements will give you a very clear understanding how the cloud computing has made the computing very simple. So based upon your need, we are going to subscribe to a particular service model. So to elaborate here, some users some company or some organization deploy their application on a cloud, and they themselves will call as a cloud service provider. Means, say I want to come up with a new email service like Gmail, and to have my mail service, I want underlying hardware, I want an underlying programming environment where I can deploy my application. For that, I can subscribe to a cloud service provider who provides me required IT infra, who provides me required deployment environment, and I use those cloud services, and in turn I provide my application, a mailing application, as a software as a service to the society. So means I myself is a cloud service provider providing mail service, which is software as a service, and in turn using the cloud services of other service providers who's providing infrastructure as a service and the platform as a service. So here, to understand, when we speak about multi-tenancy, people always think about hardware as multi-tenancy, but whatever the softwares which we are using, the softwares are also of two types: multi-tenant software and a single tenant software. Say for example, any software used by a single organization, we call it as a single tenant software. Say for example, an ERP of a college, which is not on cloud. Say even TCS Ion provides ERP, but again it is a software as a service. Say for example, an ERP developed by a college and being used by that particular college itself, we call it as a single tenant software, and it can't be called as a software as a service. But any software which is available to n number of organizations, n number of users, we call it as a software as a service. A simple example, as I already mentioned, Facebook, Gmail, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all these are software as a service. The common software, as a user, you just subscribe, and we are going to use that particular common software, and we call it as a software as a service. So moving on. So explaining more about the cloud deployment models. So as I already said, private cloud, public cloud, community cloud, and hybrid cloud. The diagram gives you a better understanding. See here, private cloud, a single organization. Public cloud, more organizations are going to share. Community cloud, which is organizations who have shared interest, mutual trust. And combination of a private, public, or community cloud is nothing but an hybrid cloud. So this is the way how the cloud deployment models have come up. So moving on, the cloud computing players who are actually providing these services. You can just look at the cloudscape or the landscape. Many organizations are providing huge number of services, huge number of services. Say if you look into Amazon services, AWS services, sometime when you just Google it and you can find 50 plus number of services are provided by just Amazon itself, like the way Google is providing, like the way Microsoft is providing. You can see here in the slide few selected. These are the various software as a services, and even the verticals are clear. These are all CRM softwares. These are all marketing and demand generation. These are the human resources, finance, accounting, content management, and vertical management. So means for an organization, for their specific need, instead of worrying about developing their own application, there are softwares which are readily available as software as a service. Just subscribe to those software and start using it and get benefited. Then see here, the bottom line also: business intelligence, collaboration, e-commerce, marketing analytics, enterprise social media, even for advertisement as well. Huge number of software as a services have come up. Then platform as a service. These are the various services which are available by using which we can develop our applications without worrying about making an environment ready, integrating multiple softwares, worrying about their licenses, just ready to develop our applications, ready to deploy our applications. And on the bottom, you could see the infrastructure as a service where we can get the required IT infra in a fraction of time provided by the various service providers. So this is the huge cloud landscape available for the cloud subscribers to use, which are the proven services. So moving on, as already I mentioned in the beginning, I just want to put my presentation at the fundamental. These days, even before getting an understanding of the cloud computing, people were speaking about fog computing, people are speaking about edge computing, and there is a lot of confusion. Some says fog computing has come, so the cloud computing is over. Some started saying edge computing has come, fog computing has gone. But please understand, it's not the case. All these three are again interdependent. As I mentioned, cloud computing is a distributed computing environment interconnected through a network and finally looks like a central computing environment. Now, before the fog and edge computing has come, when we are using the cloud computing environment for our processes and for our data, we always need to connect through a network, move to the data center where exactly our data and processes are available. And we move all the data to the cloud and we get all the data from the cloud whenever we require. Now, later the fog computing has come. The fog computing is nothing but it is a distributed computing model which again connects to the cloud. It helps in reducing the cloud latencies. What does this fog computing says? So now you have migrated onto the cloud or you are using the third-party cloud services, and for always for your data and processes you need to connect to the data center and get it back. The fog says your computing, your data will be available at your doorstep, and this is what the distributing environment. And now the fog reduces the amount of the data that has to be sent back to the cloud. In simple, the fog works like a cache, the cache memory in your memory hierarchy. And on the top of the fog computing has come an edge computing. Nowadays, whatever the applications which we are working, most of the applications are IoT applications. Now the most of the computing speaks about cyber physical machines. What is this cyber physical machine? We are now trying to convert all the mechanical machines as a computing machines. How this is possible? We are just connecting using the sensors and we are catching the data of those mechanical machines. We are trying to take the control of those mechanical machines by using these IoTs, microcontrollers, sensors, etc. And the collected data has to go back to our processes and the data. So now, edge computing, the name itself says, which lies in the edges, connects to the sensors and the microcontrollers, and where it collects the data and gives it to the nodes present with the fog, and which actually moves back to the cloud data centers where the final data and the processes are available. So now, when someone say is working with IoT applications and say IoT application having its process stored on the cloud, to have an effective application, definitely the IoT application has to use edge computing, below that the fog computing to reduce the latencies, and finally it has to use the cloud for performing the complex computing. So here When I speak about complex computing, the cloud can perform, but the fog can't, because fog is nothing but the nodes. Cloud is nothing but the data centers. Edge is nothing but just the devices who can sense the data, and just the fraction of the bits of the data will be sent to the fogs, who does the processing at the local, but the simple calculations and the simple processing. But finally, the summarized one will move on to the cloud where the complex computing takes place. So this is what the basic difference or the correlation between, or the interdependency between the cloud, fog, and edge computing. So moving on, as students, you might raise me a question. How do I explore infrastructure as a service? How do I explore platform as a service? Or how do I explore software as a service? So the major service providers or the major cloud players, as a CSR, they are supporting organizations and the students to explore the cloud services and to learn the use of cloud services so that the IT industry will get benefited. If you look at this current slide, so it speaks about Amazon Web Services at free of cost, some basic services at free of cost for the students and educators. And this you people can get by getting registered on awseducate.com. Amazon Web Services is providing a program known as AWS Educate. So your faculty, your principal, or your department can register with AWS Educate. Once the registration is done, the basic Amazon Web Services cloud services like Amazon EC2, Amazon S3, etc. are available at free of cost for the students. You can explore and you can run your applications, you can deploy your applications on the cloud. Moving on, Microsoft is another important player, and Microsoft also provides the Azure services at free of cost for the students upon subscribing. You can just look at the slide. Start building the future with Azure for students. Get a $100 credit when you create your free account with Azure. Just sign in, get registered with the Microsoft Live account. $100 credit services will be credited to your account where you can deploy your applications, where you can create an instance, where you can create your own virtual private network, where you can get your underlying IT infra required, where you can get an operating system of your choice. So you can start exploring where even organization intervention is not required here with Azure. As a student, you can just start using it. And meanwhile, there is another cloud service player, Salesforce. They offer a program known as Trailhead, by using which they provide their cloud services at free of cost to the students. Not just for the students, even for the startup entrepreneurs, they can build their applications on the Trailhead without paying a single penny to the Salesforce until they go for commercialization. Like this, every cloud service provider is having their offering at free of cost to the students. So I hope after this session you all will for your applications and for understanding cloud.
Sir.
So this is what I thought of sharing as a fundamental of cloud computing to you all. So now I'm available for any questions, and thanks for listening to the session patiently. So I'm open for questions, organizers.
So participants, if you have any questions, please do type in your chat box so that the sir can answer. Over.
Sir, I have one question.
Yeah, I'm having very first question which says, where does the cloud store its backups, and what reimbursement does the user get if his or her data is lost? As I said, I try to put the session very fundamental. all the cloud data will be stored in the cloud data centers, which are available across the world for the service provider. And speaking about the loss of the data, as I mentioned, cloud will follow a mechanism known as data replication. The data replication says any data stored on the cloud will be maintained as 3 copies, not just 1 copy. So any single data stored, we are going to have 3 copies of the data. So if we lose 1 copy, then the other 2 copies will be available. But now still all the 3 copies are lost. What to do? As I mentioned, when we subscribe to the cloud, we have a service level agreement. In the SLA we mentioned, as I mentioned, one of the characteristic is availability. In the availability, the cloud service provider says 99.99% my services are available. Say sometimes the services are not available and you can't continue your business transactions, so that it is a loss incurred to your business. Then the cloud servicer has to pay for that. And all these laws and policies will be maintained and mentioned in the service level agreement whenever you subscribe to the cloud. Someone is saying, sir, next session, can you give a small example of use of cloud? Definitely we can do that. I can take AWS, or I can take Azure, and creation of an VPN I can do. But even you can find lots of videos for the beginners to create your own instance, to create your own infra in YouTube, and you can use it. And if organize a schedule, I'm ready to do that. I'm ready to do that. More questions? Any more questions? Hope it was not an overhead transmission.
Hello.
Yeah. Yes.
Principal. So I found that you have covered very well.
Good evening, sir. Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
You have covered very well the basics, very clearly, very
Yes, sir.
detailed way. You have explained the basics of cloud computing. I think all the students who are attending this course, they should be very familiar now with what is available and what is the need and what is the purpose and all those aspects, and some challenges and benefits. And I think usage is the only way we can learn better. And you also given the end, at least what Amazon or Microsoft or Salesforce are providing free software for students to explore. I think the best way is to start exploring, then only we can learn better. I don't know how many students have registered. Whoever have registered, Mysura,
Sure.
please follow up.
Sure, sure.
Make small projects of this, and I don't know how many students have appeared, but those who have in this, please make attempt for usage of cloud computing and make some notes and
Sure,
submit.
sir. The webinar is fully recorded, sir. We will be sharing the video link to all the students so that they can view this webinar in any time. In case of doubts, they can contact Rajnikant sir also.
That's a general statement, but let there be specific people who are interested and who should give reports of the usage of clouds. Whatever simple ways, learning is always excusable. Once you are in the field, there is no excuse. So now you can take chances and make your own reports of use of cloud. Whoever is interested, at least few of them should be submitted.
Sure.
That's my request. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
It went well, sir. Congratulations.
Sir, Uday sir has come, sir.
Okay.
Hello, sir. Yeah, sir.
Hello, sir.
I mean, the session, it went well, sir. I mean, you covered all the basics pretty much. I mean, there will be a lot of demand also for cloud in the future.
Yes, sir.
Especially nowadays, we are seeing Azure and as well as AWS.
Yes, sir.
They are one among the top cloud providers, and most of the companies are actually switching over to cloud because servers
Yes,
and
sir.
all, it's very expensive to maintain. And these companies, they are offering it at a very low price when small
Yes,
companies
sir.
are migrating.
Yes, sir.
So there will
And
be a lot of
organizations
demand.
can actually concentrate on their core, business and core operations instead of concentrating on IT, and which is not their core operation, and it's a headache for them.
Yeah, I know. I was talking to a few company people, and what their what is their thought process is, if they are going for cloud, they can actually save 3 to 4 resources in the company. Database administrator is not required, server administrator is not required, and data retrieval and all. I mean, if we give the, what do you call, the template, they'll only give and design everything, and they'll give it to the company. So
Yes.
companies are actually saving a lot of money by using cloud.
And even the cost incurred in purchasing that required hardware and maintaining that hardware and space for the hardware, everything can be saved by the organization.
Yeah, it's a very good technology.
Very good technology, sir. And
Hope all the
nowadays,
students.
we can't. Yes,
Nothing, sir. Go
sir.
ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, nowadays, no one can say that, computing is a problem for me. The computing is available at our doorsteps. Whatever the computing we want is available, and various service providers are providing very sophisticated services. And just we have to work on our innovation, our technology, and our development and deployment. So that's where the cloud computing has landed now, and has become the backbone of computing environment across the world. And now, for any student in any company that gets placed, definitely they are going to get exposed to the cloud computing environment only. They are going to work only with the cloud services. This is what my experience.
Yes, sir. I think it went. It went well, sir. I hope all the students
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
enjoyed the lecture thoroughly.
Yeah, yes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rajnikant sir. Nicely, you have presented all the fundamentals of cloud computing. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
At the outset, I congratulate the IEEE Student Branch Computer Society Chapter Advisor and IEEE Student Branch SREAS Counselor Dr. Prasad sir, and the students. Particularly, there are a few students very much active in IEEE Student Branch. Mysura and several other students. My appreciation and congrats to all. Thank you, Rajnikant sir, once again for your beautiful and informative presentation. Hope students must have enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir.
So I would like to thank the IEEE Hyderabad section and IEEE Computer Society chapter of Hyderabad for giving this opportunity and for the approval of IEEE SREAS Student Branch Computer Society chapter also. And I would like to thank our management for giving this opportunity to organize these events in this pandemic time too. And finally, I would like to thank Rajnikant sir for giving away his time to conduct this event. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.